So at that point, let's go ahead and get into our first story here, which unfortunately looks like Alex's internet just crapped out, and he was supposed to cover it. So yeah, we're gonna talk about this really quick, and we'll let him kind of go over the details when he gets back. But yeah, you guys wanted us all to talk about this. Sony's moving to acquire Crunchyroll. Now, I believe what they're actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Romney, I think they're trying to acquire Otter Media overall, aren't they?
Well, looking here, especially from the Anime News Network, let's see. Yeah, it looks like what it is that AT&T is offering Crunchyroll to Sony to the tune of $1.5 billion, which Sony then basically balked at because of the price. And so, look like it's specifically Crunchyroll. So it is specifically like Sony is specifically eyeing Crunchyroll, and that AT&T is the one who initiated the offer initially, leading to the various negotiations regarding how much Sony would be willing to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of cut out there a little bit, but you covered all the details that we needed to cover here. So, yeah, they offered a very big price, which Sony was not happy about. I don't know if this is where you kind of got cut out. I don't think they've offered a lower price at this point, have they?
Well, looking at the article here, it looks like that the asking price was lowered down to $1 billion. But again,
$1 billion. Okay.
Mostly rumor, according to Variety. But the exact figures are still not yet known. This is just based on insider information. And then the Nikkei, which is kind of the Asian equivalent of the stock exchange. Again, not a one-to-one comparison, but that's kind of the best way to compare it. The Nikkei is reporting that Sony could spend up more than 100 billion yen, which in U.S. currency would be $957 million, so almost $1 billion, to acquire Crunchyroll. And that seems to be what is going on, is that they're in the final stages of making that acquisition official. Granted, it's still rumor. There hasn't been any official statement by either company on whether or not this is actually going through. This is just Nikkei saying, hey, there's this transaction that we're monitoring that may be going through in the near future.
Yeah, and one of the things that is getting brought up, especially in light of this, when people suggested this story, is I hate to say it in any other way, but Sony's basically looking to acquire the anime industry. Because they're probably only missing like one or two companies at this point, and then they've got full monopoly on it.
Well, I guess to better clarify, it wouldn't necessarily be that they're trying to monopolize the entire anime industry, but specifically trying to monopolize international anime distribution would probably be the better way to look at it. Since the anime,
because they've already got that.
Yeah, since the anime companies in Japan will still basically, do their own thing, whereas Crunchyroll, given that it operates in multiple countries outside of Japan, that seems to be the angle Sony is more going for, is trying to basically monopolize international anime distribution and specifically anime streaming, especially in the face of companies like Netflix getting into the anime production arena, as well as a few other companies also throwing their hat in the ring to varying degrees of success.
Because we've actually been seeing a lot of uptick when it came to organizations like Netflix, even Amazon Prime to an extent is starting to acquire more anime. I actually specifically saw that Prime is working out a deal with I believe Retro Crush to try and get their stuff too, to be able to help work those out together. Because it's just being offered through since they've re-tiered into their Prime Video service, which is cheaper. So at that point, like, we're seeing a lot of people doing a cash grab towards the streaming services as well as to anime, because I think it's safe to say at this point, a good portion of that audience watch anime to some extent, especially internationally.
Indeed, especially when you consider the success of certain shows. I mean, of course, you've got shows like Dragon Ball Super and Z that kind of opened the door, but then when you consider the popularity of more mainstream shows like Sword Art Online, as well as a few of the other up-and-coming series like Demon Slayer, My Hero Academia, so on and so forth, it shows that, hey, this is a very lucrative market, and Netflix is approaching it in a different way of thinking, okay, well, let's bankroll our own shows rather than trying to license ones that are already airing, because after the backlash with Little Witch Academia, they realized, hey, this is, kind of a pain in the butt. Let's just finance our own shows and, release it on our own terms, which, again, has had varying degrees of success, depending on who you ask and depending on what shows you're looking at, especially given that they've also been trying to create what I like to call Western anime. This would be shows like Castlevania, Dragon's Dogma,
Yeah.
as well as I think most recently Blood of Zeus is probably the most recent one.
Yeah, and I think we're still expecting the Devil May Cry series from Adi Shankar too, as well.
Yep, as well as a few other shows that they've been brokering deals with companies like Skybound and Image to adapt into various media, which, again, Amazon themselves have also been brokering, because I know Amazon Prime did the adaptation of Super Dinosaur, which is another Robert Kirkman property.
Yeah.
And so, to kind of get back on point, Sony is basically looking to try to control a majority share of anime distribution in the West, and specifically streaming, which has basically become the cash cow. And I know, and I'm not alone in saying this, but honestly, this acquisition has me concerned. Greatly concerned.
Yes. You're not the only one, because like I looked at the international distribution aspect of this, just because I get that a lot of organizations are going towards they want to own anime, but already the distribution aspect was kind of concerning to me, because I don't like the idea of one company handling all of the distribution. Because then at that point, if there's only one company running the distribution, things don't necessarily have to change or improve due to competition. And so things could actually technically get worse under Sony.
Yeah, especially when you consider some of the localization missteps and very, very questionable decisions taken by another Sony-owned anime distributor, Funimation.
Yeah.
I mean, the most famous example being Ms. Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, but there have been more and more shows where even the subtitle translations have been of questionable quality because of a misguided attempt to try to make it more relevant to Western audiences that aren't really part of the major demographic, which to me, I find baffling. I mean, I can understand trying to do that with shows that have that mainstream appeal, like Attack on Titan and My Hero Academia.
Yeah.
To a point. But when you're doing it with shows that are tailoring to a very specific niche, like Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, like Interspecies Reviewers, and a lot of these other shows that are more risque, I look at this and I'm just like, you're clearly not understanding the target demographic for these shows, and you're trying to basically head off criticisms that were never made against these shows in the first place. And considering that Sony is very much the one, I mean, this isn't limited just to Funimation, considering that Sony has also been very much pushing for censorship of their video games. If Sony acquires Crunchyroll, I worry they're going to try to enact a lot of the same policies and practices onto Crunchyroll that we are already seeing with Funimation.
Yeah, we're already seeing like a bunch of stuff from our live chat of concerns of trying to implement various practices, whether it be from distribution rights to Funimation's dubbing, things like that. The other thing that I also want to bring up, because this was specifically asked by a listener and I didn't know the answer, because like every time I think I know this, you guys kind of prove me wrong, and I'm glad Alex is back because he can kind of help out with this. Simulcasting. So a lot of people are also worried that this is going to affect overall simulcasting, because Sony would basically gain the rights to all of simulcasting, because of what Crunchyroll has. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but it would be kind of worrying if they had to run through Sony corporate to get these things done, because I don't see Sony being forthright as much as Crunchyroll has with, like, if you can get a dub available to be able to simulcast with those. Because I think that's happened, right? Where you've had English sub, but you've also had English dub going on at the same time in the simulcast.
Yeah, but a large part of that usually comes from outstanding agreements. Attack on Titan is a good example, where the deal that was in place was brokered back when Funimation and Crunchyroll were working together before the Sony acquisition, where they had the general agreement of, hey, Crunchyroll will simulcast it subtitled, and then Funimation will produce a broadcast dub that will go live 3 days after the episode airs on Crunchyroll, which Crunchyroll usually uploads the episodes usually within the day of it airing in Japan. And so a lot of those agreements, especially if they're already outstanding agreements in place between Crunchyroll and Funimation, that's why, even though they're no longer working together, that's why you'll still see the Funimation and Crunchyroll logos on shows like My Hero Academia and Attack on Titan, because those agreements are still in place. As for Sony controlling the whole thing, yeah, that is very concerning, but again, it comes down to whether or not the companies like Funimation or Crunchyroll are part of the initial planning committees behind these shows, or if they're having to license them, and whether or not the company producing and distributing the show in Japan is willing to agree to the terms that Sony sets forth. Which, granted, for companies that are investing a lot of money in producing an anime series, having that massive distribution would be helpful, but Sony is not the only game in town. This is why JoJo is distributed by Viz. Same case with One Punch Man, where rather than going through a lot of the major players like Funimation, they instead went to Viz, which kind of does its own thing, especially given that with JoJo especially, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has to go through an extra layer of translation and localization because, Araki really, really loves making musical references, and American musicians and musical acts are very, very litigious.
Jeez, I can't even begin to wow, I just had a really twisted thought in my head that I kind of need to share. Like, JoJo, man, would that even ever get to the States if Sony was in charge? Like, Sony Music would basically take over the series.
Yeah, it's tricky because it would be a case where, and again, if Sony were to, firstly, I doubt Araki would actually agree to give it to Sony because of the fact that a lot of the musical acts he references are actually under Warner Brothers music. That's why you have the ending themes of the JoJo series using Western music like Roundabout by Yes, or Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles, or I Want You, I Need You by Savage Garden.
Didn't he also reference like Michael and Beatles and things like that?
Oh, it goes across the board, the kind of musical acts he's referencing. But because Warner Brothers Japan is the company that is helping to produce the JoJo anime, they have rights. They have the licensing rights to all of the music catalog of Warner Brothers Music, and so that kind of mitigates some of it. Whereas Sony's music distribution doesn't have the kind of library that would gel well with JoJo, and so that would be something that Sony themselves would run into, especially considering that they would effectively be having to work with Warner Brothers in order to bring it to the US if they had the rights. But because Warner Brothers tried to do it themselves, dropped the ball, and then handed it off to Viz, that's why Viz is the major distributor. And so in terms of how it would affect the simulcasting agreements with shows that Sony would be able to license, again, it would be concerning considering that they would be doing both simuldub and simul-sub. But because of the fact that it would really come down to whether or not the company producing the anime would agree to Sony's terms, that's really going to be what is going to make or break it. Some companies like Toei and maybe Toho would be a bit more inclined to work with Sony because of the established infrastructure. But there are other anime companies that maybe they don't necessarily trust Sony. They may want to go with a different route. And so, again, case in point, if it's a show produced by Warner Brothers Japan, they're not going to necessarily want to distribute through Sony because Sony is a direct competitor. But likewise, if it's a company that, say, has an outstanding agreement with the likes of Bandai Namco, they'd be more inclined because Bandai Namco has a very good relationship with Sony, particularly because of series like Tekken and Soul Calibur.
Oh, that's true. Okay. Alex, I kind of want to bring this question to you as well, but feel free, Romney, to interject here. Because I know, like, you and me talk a lot of the more mainstream anime, but this is a concern that a listener brought directly to Alex, being that he is the hipster of the podcast. Does this pretty much nuke the possibility of bringing unique, up-and-coming indie darlings in the anime scene because Sony's never going to want to procure them? Sony's only ever going to want to procure what's popular, what's marketable, things like that. And so, where shonens will have no issue with it, relationship anime, slice of life anime might get the shaft when it comes to Sony's discussion of what they want to pick up and what they want to dub and everything like that. Is there a legit worry to that? Is that something that has to be considered? Is that smaller, more darling artistic shows are no longer going to be considered for simulcast, or not simulcast, but for dubbing over or being able to get any kind of rights distributed over to the US?
I'm not as concerned about that because at this point, the digital market has opened up, I think, way more than for shows like that than one that we ever had in the early days of even the VHS market, the DVD market, or just the plain Blu-ray market.
Yeah, and I can only talk about like one major market in that regard when it came to Japan. Like, I do follow a lot of pro wrestling, and I love the accessibility of New Japan Pro World. being able,
Right.
like, I can watch Wrestle Kingdom in the comfort of my own home. I don't have to go to Tokyo anymore to do that. And so, like, I know that aspect, but I don't know necessarily how that would work from an anime perspective, or even in the cases of another thing that this person brought up, like the dramas that are being brought over and I believe dubbed by Funimation, like live action dramas.
I don't think Funimation's dubbing any live action dramas. There might be one or two.
I know
that
they have some in their.
and
I know they have some on their streaming service, but I'm not sure if they're dubbed.
I've
They've
not seen
done
any.
they've done some subtitle distribution of certain live action shows and movies in the past. It really depends on if there's enough of a demand for a dub. I mean, for example, there was one live action drama series they distributed that I watched during the simulcast called Moyashimon that they never really bothered to dub because it was a very niche series. But if you look at the live action Kenshin films, because of the fact that Kenshin is an established brand, again, barring, all the usual asterisks regarding Nobuhiro Watsuki, a live action movie like the Kenshin trilogy is going to probably get more of the attention and actually get a dub as opposed to the more niche stuff like Moyashimon. And so they have distributed some live action stuff, and they've even done dubs of live action films from other countries like Korea. I remember there was a brief period of time where they were bringing over a lot of Korean movies that were dubbed, and especially given that Okratron themselves, Chris Sabat's dubbing studio, also is frequently brought in to dub a lot of foreign live action Asian films. And so it's one of those cases where they've done it a little bit. It really just depends on if the series itself warrants it. It's just doing a dub of a live action show carries a whole separate set of risks and challenges. It's kind of one of the reasons why Ultraman never got a foothold here in the States.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, Alex, what you're basically saying is that we don't have to worry about that. They'll still find a way to digitally distribute some of these more niche series.
Yeah, I mean, so the studios under Sony's umbrella in Japan produce slice of life anime that have become major hits, or some that have, or just get enough views, I suppose. I don't see why all of a sudden, because Funimation's also Sony is gonna own Crunchyroll, that means we're suddenly not gonna get any slice of life. I'm pretty confident that we're still gonna get slice of life, even if it's not on Crunchyroll. Well, there's still Sentai Filmworks out there. There's still Netflix out there.
If anything, like Viz could take over for that and make it kind of their primary one.
Yeah, kind of really. Yeah, I guess it would really depend on the show and if it has enough of a demand. Because I know companies like Discotek have stepped in with shows that most people would consider really niche, and even Nozomi Entertainment. A good example is the Kickstarter that Nozomi launched for shows like Aria, as well as most recently dubbing the show Emma, which is an animated period drama that you'd think would probably find a really good audience here if it was aired alongside, Masterpiece Theater and stuff like that. And so that demand is still going to be there. And I know Aniplex themselves have produced some of those more niche shows that people want to consume. And so it would be foolhardy if Sony just suddenly went, oh, we're not going to care about these shows. Like, hey, they want to pay for it. If they'll just settle for a sub, we'll do the subs. If there's enough of a demand for the show, we'll do a dub. It's just good business sense.
Okay, and this one I want to aim at both of you, because you will be able to answer it better than me. I know that Viz and Crunchyroll are lumped into the Warner Brothers umbrella. They're part of it. But this was a question that I couldn't answer. Doesn't it mean by default that if they bought Crunchyroll, they would also buy Viz? I don't think they would, because that would make about as much sense as lumping in Rooster Teeth in there.
Yeah, that's not really.
Viz is its own company.
Yeah, Viz is its own company, and AT&T, the company that owns Crunchyroll is what they are offering. They're not offering any of the others. I'm sure Sony probably made some sort of a counter offer to try to acquire some of the other stuff. And so the other thing to consider is that they may be selling the Crunchyroll as in the streaming service and the company that provides it. But that also raises the question, was that going to include Elation Studios, the company that is producing a lot of the original adaptations, such as Tower of God, and a lot of the other original animes like, High Guardian Spice, which nobody's really heard hide nor hair of because it's since been overshadowed by all of the webtoon adaptations. But again, Crunchyroll is what is on the offering block. That's what AT&T said, hey, Sony, you want to buy this for about $1 billion? And so Viz is completely separate from it. And considering that a lot of the shows Viz licenses, there have been some that had simulcast agreements on Crunchyroll, but that's not because they cut the deal with Viz. That's because Crunchyroll cut the deal with the studios in Japan that were creating the shows in Japan, with Viz picking up the home video rights, which people kind of forget. The rights to stream and the rights to distribute it on DVD and Blu-ray for the home video market, they're not always the same. What one company may allow for one company to stream, they may go to a completely different company for home video, as we've seen with, well, JoJo and One Punch Man. They let Crunchyroll stream it, but then they went to a different company. And that's kind of the key thing here, is that what it looks like Sony is more focused on securing international streaming of anime with the acquisition of Crunchyroll, but that may not necessarily mean that they're gonna, own all of it, because there's still the home video market with the likes of Sentai, Nozomi, Viz, and a lot of these other companies that are still catering to these niches that, honestly, most of the major players have kind of ignored within the past decade or so with anime releases. I mean, even companies like Shout Factory and G-Kids have been stepping up to pick up shows that most people pass over. I mean, we probably wouldn't get Digimon if it wasn't for companies like Shout Factory and Saban. And that's another factor. Saban is still also in the anime distribution game. They've just scaled things back.
All right. And okay, so while we've been having this discussion, and I value it, holy crap, the chat has been going kind of crazy. So at that point, I kind of want to address some of the things that they're talking about, because, they're here, and I want to get them involved here. So let's just go ahead and go from the top, so to speak. RPX is asking, will they change the name from Crunchyroll to Cinnamon Roll? That would be hilarious.
That would be hilarious. That would kind of go against the reference, because the name Crunchyroll is specifically in reference to a type of sushi roll. So unless there's a very obscure, sweet-tasting type of sushi called a cinnamon roll, which if there is, I kind of want to try it to see just how that would work. I mean, I could see it working, especially if you marinate the fish in like mirin or something, which naturally tastes a little bit sweet. Or I can even see that working with something like tamagoyaki, where you mix it with mirin, and then maybe as you're folding the egg, you put the cinnamon in. But yeah, just.
All right, so we also have Kasaibo saying, if Sony does dominate Japanese animation, they better improve studio working conditions. Not likely.
Unfortunately, that's a whole nother issue than what we're talking about. We're talking about the international distribution rights, and versus the current production models that Japan and
the reason I want to bring it up is because it's Sony. Sony ain't doing nothing.
No, not unless it's something that would, not unless such outrage against not doing anything would cut into their bottom line, because sadly, that's the way it works. The company only cares if it actually affects the bottom line.
Yep. So then we also have a question of, will they bring back Megas XLR? I don't think anybody. I think Cartoon Network has the rights to that, don't they?
Well, yeah, because it was a Cartoon Network show. It wasn't an anime. It was an original show.
That would be Turner, but I don't think Crunchyroll would have it.
That would fall more under Warner Brothers, sort of, since Warner Brothers kind of bought out Turner, and so a lot of the Cartoon Network shows that people remember fondly falls under the Otter Media umbrella to an extent. It gets complicated depending on the specific shows, because some shows that air on Adult Swim, although partially financed by Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, may not necessarily be distributed through the same channels. But that's also why a lot of the DC animated shows were airing on Cartoon Network almost exclusively for a good chunk of time, because Warner Brothers kind of controls, I don't know to what extent, but Cartoon Network kind of falls under Warner Brothers' tenure. So in terms of Megas XLR, you'd have to take it up with Warner Brothers to see if they want to redistribute it. And if there's probably enough of a demand, I can see them thinking, oh, hey, yeah, let's just crank out a DVD release. But if in terms of a full-on Megas XLR revival, I doubt it, mostly just because
I just want Megas on DVD is all I really want. Like, that was a great show.
Like that I can see being more likely. A revival, not so much. I mean, there's a lot of people that are wanting a revival of shows like Symbionic Titan, but we know that is never going to happen.
Are you kidding me? Like, I think a couple of other series are more likely than Symbionic Titan, which is sad, because I know a lot of people love that. RPX also said, expect the return of the fan sub Underground. They left?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean,
I don't think they left.
They never really left, but they did kind of change a little bit, where most of the piracy websites tend to steal their subtitles from Crunchyroll, but there are some shows that do still get the fan sub treatment. Those are usually shows that not even Crunchyroll licenses, or it's stuff that is really, really niche, or in an area that I'm more familiar with, a lot of the live-action tokusatsu shows that are airing that nobody really in the US outside of Shout Factory or Kraken Entertainment has thought to license, which thankfully they have started to license, particularly shows like GNRO. But again, the fansub community, there's always that demand. It's always going to be there. There is no way for it to go away. It really just depends on what shows these other companies and streaming services choose not to license. And that's pretty much a major factor. And that's why you'll still see fan subs for shows like the earlier seasons of Baki the Grappler, because despite the new Netflix show, nobody has bothered to pick up the older episodes, so that way people can actually understand what the hell is going on in the Netflix show.
Which is sad, because I'd like that, because that's like my main apprehension to watching Baki. So Kasaibo is also expressing some interests in the dubbing aspect of it. Specifically, he's bringing up Jamie Markey botching Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid's dub. Specifically, also bringing up a quote from Markey. I believe it's a quote anyway. If there are any line changes in any anime, any script, anything that ever offended anyone who unironically used the terms like SJW and feminist agenda, I wrote them all. Jamie Markey. I don't think that would, because here's the thing. If they wanted to do, like, I get the international distribution, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it goes into the dubs. Sony is at least wise enough to be able to see, like, if somebody's pissing off our market, we're going to take them out, and they don't get to do it no more.
Yeah, to a point, though. Again, Sony does have a bit of history of pushing for censorship
They do.
as late. And so what it would take is that it would have to take one of those changes, not necessarily pissing off the market, but pissing off the original creators of the anime. Because a lot of people don't realize is that the voice casting, the scripts, a lot of that has to be run by the original production committee.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't watched Miss Kobayashi, but I think either you or Alex has. Didn't it piss off the creator that she did that?
No, not that I heard of.
Not that I heard
of. It pissed people off. Most people refer to, Romney's brought this up before, but most people refer to a line that Lukua said that was changed in the dub, where Lukua later, Lukua's a very busty dragon woman.
Yeah.
And, she most of the time wears a kind of a low-cut tank top.
Yeah, and there's an episode where she comes in a little bit more tasteful.
Yeah, a little more, she's wearing a sweater, and the English dub line had her say, something like the patriarchy had me cover up or something shit like that. Oh, it was a dumb line. I agree.
Yeah, it's bad taste.
Well, bad taste, but it also went against the original intention of the scene from both the original manga and the original intention of the creator. And so, for anything like that to really be rooted out, it would have to be something big enough to get the people in Japan's attention and get them angry. But for the most part, I mean, shows like Kobayashi's Dragon Maid tailors to a specific niche. It would have to take some really monumental localization F-up for something like Attack on Titan or My Hero Academia, then having that firestorm reach Japan. That is what it would take, but the likelihood of that happening, I don't really see, mostly because, well, the shows that they seem to be doing these sort of arbitrary changes to are, again, these niche shows that tend to skew older, that tend to be tailored towards particular otaku of culture, for lack of a better term.
Gotcha. This one, actually, Alex has been kind of engaging in, and I want to bring it up too. GNRO brings up no more unedited openings or endings music. Think 4K kids raps. What the simulcasts have the openings?
Every one of them do. Every anime.
Oh, I always thought they just cut into the episode.
Well, no. The key thing is that the stuff that's on the streaming services, they don't cut into. The only times they cut into it is if they're airing it on TV. So if they're airing it on Adult Swim, that is when they cut down the theme songs. That's kind of the only time that happens, but that's more just because, well, people are very stingy for ad time. And so in the case, for example, the JoJo anime, they truncate the opening a little bit, so that way the ending sequence can be aired in its entirety because, well, if you're going to have an anime that has Savage Garden as the ending theme, you may as well see to it that the animated sequence with, Savage Garden gets the airplay, even if it means truncating the original opening. And so it's only when it's airing specifically on television where they cut out the openings and endings, because that's more of an issue with American television and the way it's structured in regards to advertising.
So at that point, like, okay, I get that concept, but I don't see them cutting these things out. I mean, you know, Sony Music is a monster, even I'll admit that, but I don't think they're going to be playing into any of this.
Yeah,
No.
I really don't see them omitting or changing the theme songs again, except in maybe the rare cases where it's like a popular licensed song. The best example I always think of was Eden of the East from like a decade ago.
Yeah.
The Japanese version played Falling Down by Oasis, and
Ooh,
when
okay.
when Funimation picked up the series, they really couldn't pay out for the whole song for the whole series. So
Yeah.
out for the DVD release, they did cut the opening out. They still had the opening, but they changed the opening to a piece of score that was, or not a score. It was another song written for the anime,
Okay.
and that was for the DVD release from episodes 2 through, I think it was 12 or 13. I can't remember now, but yeah. So those are the times that I see that happening, is if an opening theme song or ending theme song gets omitted, is when it's like a popular Western licensed song that would cost people like Sony or Funimation too much money to pay out for licenses.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very common thing, because copyright law works differently in Japan than it does here. Because another good example of an anime that avoided this because someone was able to talk sense into the director was LR, because the director of LR wanted to use Beatles music, which, as anybody who knows anything about music history knows, is a real pain in the ass to
It's
license.
a cluster F to be able to do it.
And it would basically bankrupt any anime distributor who would try to distribute it as is. Fortunately, they were able to talk sense into the director, and so they only had to worry about the one song by Billy Preston that was licensed, which even then, some accounts conflict on it, but some people say, oh, this was created specifically for the show, but others have pointed out, no, this song existed before. It's just, you know, the people representing Billy Preston allowed it to be used for the show. But yeah, I mean, another recent example of this is with the Netflix distribution of Evangelion. One of the key things that people took a lot of issue with is that they had to take out Fly Me to the Moon, which was the recurring ending theme for Evangelion, when they licensed it to Netflix. And yeah, that's actually a very, very common thing. That's actually the reason why there are certain video games that they have never re-released or ported. A good example is Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus.
I was going to say, Dirge is in there.
Yeah, because Dirge of Cerberus licensed songs from Gacht, and also licensed Gacht's likeness for the character of G. And so it's a case where Dirge of Cerberus ain't going to get any sort of like re-release unless they relicense the music and relicense Gacht's likeness. This is also why which is also why the only way to play Crisis Core is either through an emulator or through a PSP, because Square ain't licensing the likeness of, you know, superstar pop star Gacht to re-release it, because that ain't cheap.
It is not. And then the last thing I kind of want to address here, because again, we do have other stories to be able to get to, is GNRO also brings up, I'm kind of curious if they will try to grab a lot more titles and also increase the monthly sub. I think that's, given the discussion that Alex is having with him, I think that's likely, that this is probably what they're going to try and do with it, is they're going to try and accommodate to even more niches, a lot more demographics, and be able to get the distribution for them. I mean, am I incorrect in that?
I think it seems likely, and I think a large part of what will affect that is COVID, because when you look at what it takes to do the simul subs and the simul dubs, where they basically get access to the episode scripts and try to whip those things up within days, if not hours, of the show airing in Japan. I think what will affect which shows get the simul sub treatment and the simul dub treatment will largely depend on where the anime industry is post, like, both during the rest of this pandemic and beyond, and how the changes made because of COVID will affect the way anime is produced and distributed in Japan. And that's going to probably be the real deciding factor.